Hello, everyone. With me today, I have Monique Piderit. She's a dietitian and has her master's to prove it. I wanted to bring her on today really for selfish reasons because I, for one, can say that I've dropped all dietary habits that have supported me in terms of good health during lockdown, and I've gone into all the bad habits that I was trying to avoid. So I asked Monique when preparing for this what she's been up to during lockdown, and she said she's taken the time to focus on her PhD in dietetics, which further supports the fact that she knows what she's talking about. Hi, Monique.
Hi, Sid. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. So I think that most of us, not just me, have to one degree or another given up on these good habits that support us. I know that you're continuing to consult to both existing clients or patients, I'm not sure what you call them, and new ones that you meet during this time. In your experience, what are the bad habits that people have been forming?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that we don't have the structure we used to have. And that lack of structure, we're not waking up at certain times every day, which means we're not eating at certain times, has meant that we have instituted a couple of really bad habits like skipping meals entirely, which then means you are overly hungry a couple of hours later and then overdo it then. The other thing we're doing quite a bit of is we want to do less trips to the grocery store. We don't want to be exposed and be out there. So we're buying a lot of things that last long. And lo and behold, those are things like chocolates and chips and sweets and all the things that are easily preserved by salt and sugar. So those are forming quite a big part in the diet. So those are the two big things: lack of structure and, unfortunately, far too much long life food that isn't necessarily good for us.
I think you and I have a similar approach to the way that we work with people, in that we coach them. I coach on their goals and their dreams and the way they want to live, and you coach on everything that supports that in terms of nutrition and diet. So I love what you're saying in terms of structure and routine. And it is difficult because everything has changed. Where we are locked down at home, the dynamics of that situation, with our spouses, with our kids, as a family, that's all changed. So how can we start to institute decent habits that do support us in terms of health, diet, and nutrition while we lock down?
Well, in the patients I'm working with online at the moment, I'm kind of seeing two extremes. One group is saying they've got all the time in the world now to actually focus on what they're doing. Many of them are still working, so they still have that structure in place of having to wake up and be at the computer and ready to go at a certain time, whereas others are letting it completely fall by the wayside. So I think what we need to do is start bringing about a routine again, because that brings about more routine eating. And what I've been saying to people, if they are working, if they're at the computer, set themselves meeting request yourself to go at 8 o'clock breakfast. At 1 o'clock there's a half-hour gap to go and fetch lunch, because it's easy to just roll with it and actually not step away from your desk and step away from what you're doing and skip a meal. So structure is ideally important. You can even do it on your phone. Maybe set a couple of alarms on your phone through the day, go with at set times. That could even not just be about food, but things like water. A lot of people are not drinking nearly enough water, and it's of course getting a little bit cooler in South Africa at the moment. So, get up and go fetch a bottle of water and put a bottle of water on your desk to remind you to drink. There's still lots of little habits that we can put into play. I've even had some people get really organized and print out a week's planner and put that onto the fridge, and ahead of time decide what they're going to be eating for the week, so that when it comes to lunchtime, there's no ifs and buts and maybes and just grabbing a slice of toast with butter, but actually something is prepared and ready made. One of the tricks or the little tips I've been handing out is to pack our lunch boxes like we would have before going to work, and make it a rule that whatever is in that lunchbox is what you've defined for the day to eat, and you can't eat outside of that. And that often helps that mindless eating, kind of just arriving at the fridge and not knowing what to do. Another tip that one of my patients is doing, which was really clever, is she printed out a big red stop sign and she put it on her grocery cupboard and on her fridge, just as a little bit of a visual reminder for her to stop when she gets there and think about what she's doing. And it sounds silly, and it sounds maybe even a bit meaningless for some, but that double or second guessing of yourself can actually mean that you make a little bit of a better choice. Because let's face it, most of us are arriving at that fridge and just staring at what's in the grocery cupboard. One person said it quite funny. She says, you got to social distance from the fridge because it's just getting a little bit too easy to have food on standby.
And the fridge and the cupboard are the problem. When you were talking about a
Absolutely.
lunchbox, I was thinking, well, I also have that, but it's huge. It's in the form of a fridge, and I keep buying things to put in there. So, chocolate, does last a lot longer in the fridge as well. It's a big problem. The other big problem was it was easy to stay home and drink wine because I wasn't driving, but then I ran out of
True.
wine. At least then I was drinking more water than wine, but I think I'm drinking more coffee than water now. So it's this tug of war between different things. And I joke about it a lot. I'm trying to do my best within reason, but I know that I forego habits because circumstances are different. Is that what you're finding with a lot of your patients as well? And do you think that when we move from level 5 to level 4 and so on, and eventually move out of lockdown, that those good habits will resume?
I do think so. I think for many people, it was novel. It was this interesting new way of life. And the first week was maybe even fun, where we stayed in pajamas all day and slept in late and watched TV until late hours. And now life settling in, where we're realizing that this is actually quite a long-term reality we're in for. It wasn't just those initial couple of weeks. It's going to be for a long period of time. So I do suspect that a lot more people are going to stop and say, hang on, I've kind of had my fun, I've let myself go, but now it's time to rein it all in again, because this is our new normal and this is our new reality, and it is what it is, and we just have to work with it and find other ways around it. I mean, I've heard such interesting stories of people, using gardens and things out of the grocery cupboard, like taking 2.5 kilos of sugar and using that as weights and picking up kids to squat with. There's ways and means around it if you want to be healthy. So I think the first step is decide that you want this, decide that you do want to be healthy and what that means for you. Healthy eating, exercise, using the time to actually get some good sleep in place. There's a big link between sleep and nutrition, because when we aren't sleeping very well, when we're very, very stressed, there are changes in hormones that actually affect our appetite. So there's so much we can do to use it to our advantage, rather than thinking that it was just for a short term. It's going to be for a long while, and we do, anything is in our control if we choose it to be.
I would assume that there are some non-negotiables if we're interested in trying to be healthy while locked down, and drinking lots of water is one of those. But from a food take-in perspective, what would you say are some basic rules to stick to?
So your fruits and veggies are really, really nutritious. They are high in sorted vitamins and minerals, and also fiber. And all of these play a role in immunity. Some people don't appreciate that your gut is actually where we house most of our immunity. About 65 to 70% of our immunity is in the gut. So if your gut's not healthy, you are not going to be healthy from an immune point of view. So fruits and vegetables are non-negotiable. And again, in these times, people are saying, but we're not stepping out to the grocery store, we're not getting fresh fruit and vegetables. And to be honest, any form of vegetable is better than no vegetable at all. So use this time to go to frozen veggies. It's absolutely okay from a nutrition point of view. If you consider, something like a carrot that's picked and flash frozen immediately, those nutrients are retained and then put into the freezer, that's still got a lot of nutrition compared to a fresh carrot. We don't need to think that these sorts of convenience foods are bad for us. So what I'm suggesting people do, and what I'm doing for my family, do your trip out to the grocery store, buy fresh and buy frozen. Get to the fresh first. As soon as you're done with that, make your way through frozen. And then when you do the next trip out, then back to the fresh foods. So just alternate between the fresh and frozen. A good rule of thumb is to make half of your plate veggies every day. So when you're putting a meal together, if you've got a nice round plate, divide that in half, and half of that is colorful fruits and veggies, and choose different colors, because the different colors give us different nutrients. We do it with kids where we say choose different colors of the rainbow. So today you do purple, tomorrow you do a yellow, the next day you do a red, for example. And that's a nice way to keep your nutrients coming in and keeping it quite varied.
So you're saying fruit and veg, great for the immune system, yes?
Absolutely.
When I think about that, I just still feel hungry. So what about adding the meat to that?
We must. So if half that plate is veggies, a quarter will be protein like meat, chicken, fish, or eggs, dairy, and legumes if you're vegetarian or vegan. And then a quarter of that are whole grain, high fiber starch. So something like a brown rice, whole wheat couscous, as much fiber as possible coming out of those grains. So yes, you must include those, because protein is also an important part of the immune system. Those are the immune building components, the amino acids in protein. Fiber, like I said, keeps the gut healthy. So starch is a good source of fiber for good gut health, for good immunity. So in actual fact, every food plays a role. And, we shouldn't be eating any differently per se, assuming that you were healthy before. We still need to follow the same kind of principles. We still, want to minimize the sugar and the processed foods. One of the nice things about this time is we've all been forced to eat from home. We've all been forced to cook more meals, which means less sodium, less salt in a lot of these meals, less takeaways. And that can be quite a good thing if you are willing to explore in the kitchen.
Which I have been doing, and it's been amazing. I've actually gone back to the stove. I learned how to use it again.
Good.
Of immunity, I believe that vitamin A and vitamin D are very powerful and supportive in this respect, and we can go out and get exposure to the sun, which helps us to, I think, the way I understand it, is generate vitamin D within our bodies. But how can we get the vitamins that we need from the foods that we eat? Are there any specific guidelines in this respect?
Well, talking about vitamin D, there was a paper that was just published last week in America looking at the role of vitamin D and our vitamin D status linked to flu risk and risk of COVID-19 virus. It was fascinating. Of course, they concluded to say, look, we still need much larger trials and much larger studies. But in essence, what they were saying is we actually need to be focusing on vitamin D. Vitamin D, you're right, we get from the sun. So we get it when we expose our skin to sun. So a good rule of thumb, if we are at home, and a nice kind of way to just take a break if you're working, step outside 3 times a week for 15 minutes and expose your arms and legs. We maybe don't want to expose our faces and risk aging, but no sunscreen. Expose your arms and legs for about 15 minutes 3 times a week, and you'll help your body to make some of that important vitamin D. Another interesting food, just to mention, talking about fruits and vegetables, in general, we don't get a lot of vitamin D out of foods as much as we do other nutrients. So the sun is a good source. But something really interesting is that if you take a punnet of mushrooms, okay, punnet of mushrooms has about 30 to 40 IUs of vitamin D, or international units. We need 600 IUs a day. Take that punnet of mushrooms and put it in the sun, whether it's on your a windowsill in the kitchen, or outside if you've got a table to put it outside in the sun. Put it out in the sun, not for very long, 15 minutes, half an hour, and you actually increase the vitamin D in that mushroom. And it goes from about 30 IUs to roughly about 300, and can be a bit more depending on how much longer you leave it in the sun, which is pretty fascinating. So tan your mushrooms and get extra vitamin D.
And would that be assuming we eat them raw in a salad? What about cooking them? Does that remove the vitamins that we gain from doing that?
No. So this is again like the frozen versus fresh argument. A mix is what we want to be aiming for. So do a mix of cooked versus lightly steamed or raw vegetables to always maximize the nutrient quality that you're getting.
Great. So there's this argument and or belief that eating healthy is expensive. Do you buy into that?
Absolutely not. It's one of my pet peeves as a dietitian when someone tells me healthy eating is expensive. And it is expensive when you define healthy eating as having to eat certain types of foods. For example, coconut oil has become quite expensive, but olive oil is also a good option. Salmon is very expensive. It's got great omega-3s and also a nice protein source, but you get the same omega-3s out of tinned pilchards. So it depends on how you define it. And also, healthy eating is expensive because we tend to throw a lot of it away. I see this often where people think that they need to buy this massive array of fruit and vegetables every week and then end up throwing half it away because it's not consumed in time. So a good way around that is, yes, we want variety, but don't maybe make it a daily variety. Look at weekly varieties. So I encourage my patients to maybe choose 3 or 4 fruits a week and maybe 3 or 4 veggies a week, and then rotate. So this week I choose bananas and apples and pumpkin and broccoli. And that's what I buy enough of that to last the week. Next week we go and do pears and strawberries and maybe some cauliflower and beetroot, for example. So that way you have a lot less waste. So it's more of a waste thing that it's expensive, because I think we just throw away the fresh stuff.
All right. So it's really more about the plan around the eating. If we're somewhat strategic around our shopping and around our cooking, then we waste less, we spend less, and that perception around the expense of healthy eating could fall away.
And then utilizing things like the freezer. I do it often where I'll prep a meal, for example, something like a whole bunch of mince, put a lot of veggies into the mince, add a tin of lentils to make it go further, and keep a portion out to eat over the next day or two, but then also freeze some of it. So use your freezer to your advantage, prep the fruit, or the vegetable, prep the meal and freeze it, and then take it out at a later stage. Not only is that a little bit more convenient, but then anything that you would otherwise wasted because it would go off, you've now cooked, put it into a meal, and actually put it aside. I think that's where banana bread got so popular. If you haven't made banana bread by now in lockdown, I mean, what are you doing? Because we are now utilizing them.
I do believe I started that trend.
Oh, was it you?
Absolutely. Monique, thank you very much. Some amazing tips and tricks there. I believe that if we had an hour, we could use it quite easily. You're still working, you're doing digital consultations. You may be back at the office in Bryanston soon. But if anyone wants to get hold of you, book an appointment with you, how can they do that?
They can contact me directly, monique@nutritionalsolutions.co.za. And I also encourage you to just go have a look at our social media pages. Nutritional Solutions is where I practice. We've got lovely Instagram and lovely Facebook page, and all our dietitians are putting loads of tips to just help people through this time. So see if that helps you to encourage and motivate.